Hi everyone, today's video is a hobby video looking at the Astra Militarum Commissar Severina Raine. It's a painting tutorial and also a bit of a model showcase, and unfortunately this miniature is no longer available on the GW website, but of course the colour scheme I do use could be used on any other Commissar. Now as you can see, it's a fine cast resin miniature produced in 2019, and I will call out this part whilst I'm carefully plucking out the parts on the sprue. There are a couple of imperfections that have to be addressed before I fully assemble and paint the miniature. But being resin, I need to be probably a bit more careful about the fine detail and removing it from the sprue. So I'm being a bit more gentle than usual, as opposed to plastic, it can be a bit aggressive when you hack things off from the sprue. Now I've taken everything off the sprue, I actually had to get the instructions out to work out where each part starts and ends, so to say. This part here I think is her torso. It's really hard to work out where the collar finishes and starts. So I had to refer quite carefully and try and dry fit in the head as well. Likewise the head, I think there's a bit which is a bit confusing making it fit perfectly, and it's certainly quite frustrating making that fit nice and snug. Also then there was a very obvious bubble hole on her right thigh on the kit I got. So I had to get some green stuff out and basically whack it in place. I personally suck at working with green stuff. But I do know that if you wet your fingers, it can be helpful as you mix the putty and also make it apply. But I personally find it quite hard to make it fit quite well. But in the model I had, there was a great big fat bubble hole in her right thigh. The other imperfection I had to deal with was a very bent or poorly bent power sword. Now the way to basically bend these into place is to put them in warm, not boiling water, holding it long enough until it's quite malleable, if that's a proper word, and then basically using your fingers or a device to basically hold it in place and letting it set again. The power sword's meant to have a bit of a bend on it, but when she turned up in my kit it was like fully bent back, looking quite ridiculous. Right, so with all that done, here she is assembled. You can see the sword is looking a bit better. Very subtly you can see the putty on the right thigh, and also I actually have to put green stuff underneath her back collar. Now we'll call that also drilling the bore of the bolt pistol. I actually bugged that right up and actually put it too far to the right and drilled half the barrel off. So I had to clean it up with green stuff and start all over again. Defending myself there, I have to say probably the actual barrel itself is quite small, so it requires some very precise work of your finest drill bit. Okay, then I've painted the miniature with the base coat. So I've airbrushed her, and I've used Corvus Black from Citadel in the airbrush as the base coat. Then I've used a flat white from Army Painter for xenophil highlighting. Now given as she is mostly a darkest colour, i.e. black paint scheme, you could argue that probably the xenophil is not required. Of course as well, you could just use a rattle can to get the black down, and also likewise the white as well. Okay, moving on to painting, the first place I decided to start with is with the gunmetal silver I'm using from Army Painter. Now you can see I'm dry brushing the step or whatever she stood on with her right foot, and also likewise any of the silver parts on the model I've gone about and basically whacked it on. We are of course working at the base coat stage, so do just whack the paint on. And of course do try to keep yourself nice and neat as you move through to avoid any having to go over things several times. Okay, then I'm using Gull Vorbuck Red from Citadel on the underside of her cloak, and the same applies to the front of her coat, what you could probably call the front collar, and likewise also the cuffs of her sleeves. I'm using that Gull Vorbuck Red. Then using Mephiston Red by Citadel on the, I'm going to call it the cummerbund, which flows off on the left hand side. And I also will pick out all of the seams, the outside seams around the edges of her black uniform. This includes on the neck area of her uniform, and likewise also on the front, on the outside of the Gull Vorbuck Red. Okay, then getting on some more metallics, I'm using Elven Gold by Metal and Alchemy. This is quite a bright gold, and it goes on the handguard of her sword, and likewise also the bolt pistol and other areas of the miniature as well, including the Aquila on the top of her armour. Right, with all that done, I'm then filling in the blanks or filling in the black, and using matte black by Army Painter to basically finish off all of the miniature. At this point, you can see that having done all the other colours first, you can basically fill in all the black That does probably speed up the process and make it quite nice as you finish off painting the black to see it sort of come to life. Okay, now at this point, the miniature is basically done with the base coat. Now, I do skip ahead and do not show the use of Bugman's Glow on her face. And I actually also use Bugman Glow on the scriptures written on the left-hand side of her uniform. I'm also then using Mornfang Brown on her hair, which has got a little hair bun tied up the back of her head, which is quite nicely tucked away. But you can see at this point, although hard to see with the light of that I'm using, it's quite a flat finish. Okay, from there I'm then applying several shades. Now, I use firstly Nun Oil, and I basically cheat here and I put it on any of the red edges, so it does dull the red, but it does help to form that sort of clear, distinct line between the edge of the uniform and the red finishes. I'm also then using Reikland Flesh Shade, and that is of course on her flesh, but also on all the gold itself. I use Reikland Flesh Shade as opposed to some other washes or shades which are a bit darker, but I like to use Reikland Flesh Shade because it's quite a bright finish. Right, now cracking on with some edge highlight to make the miniature pop a bit more. So first I'm actually dry brushing with Sigmarite by Citadel, and it's a very fine dry brush process. So I would do it on the handguard of the sword, and likewise also, let's call them the hanging lapels on her shoulders. Then using actually polished gold by Vallejo Game Color, and this is a much brighter gold, and this is to basically actually form an edge highlight on any of the key areas, which includes the Aquillas, areas of the bolt pistol, and along her hat on the front is also the Aquila as well. Likewise on the edges of the cummerbund, you want to be using the brightest gold, which in my case is polished gold, to give it that final popping finish. And then using Stormhost Silver, this of course is picking out any of the gunmetal grey which you've done before and picking out the sharp edges. Now with the sword I actually end up repainting the entire thing and trying to leave there's like a little crevice on left and right hand side of the sword. That must be to allow blood to flow through as she stabs the enemies of the Imperium. But do be careful with that. I actually painted all over to do it again, but I actually repaint the entire sword with Stormhost Silver. Right, then I'm on to tidying up into the reds, or highlighting the reds. I'm actually using Mephiston Red again on both the wax stamp and then along the edges of the cummerbund flowing on the right hand side. It's also a similar process along all of the edges of the collars and the red trim on the uniform. So at this point you can see I've dropped to my extra small artificial layer brush by GW, which admittedly actually are quite good brushes. I've been super careful as I apply the Mephiston Red on all of the edges of the red. Well, actually repeat the same process using the Gall Vorbuck Red, and again at this point it's basically reinforcing the edges. You can obviously see it's not going to make a massive difference, but it's about reinforcing the edges of the Gall Vorbuck Red. I'm going to continue on with the highlighting of the red, and the red probably is the most important part of this miniature to make it really pop. So I've mixed the Gall Vorbuck Red with Hot Orange by Game Color Vallejo to give a bit of a sharper finish to the Gall Vorbuck Red, which is definitely on the darker side of a red. Now I've been super precise applying this on the inside of the front facing collar, and I'll also do the same on the cuffs, on her sleeves, and very critically on the exposed sides of her flowing cape. Now this is hyper precise work. Make sure you've got a steady hand, stabilizing your painting hand on the miniature or your other hand to make sure you've got some nice clean sharp lines with this mixed paint. Now using just Hot Orange by itself, I'm now applying it onto the brighter red to give it that final nice bright finish. This is of course along all of the Mephiston Red areas on her hat, and likewise along the back of the miniature on her neck, and likewise along the front as well. Now I won't show it in this video, but I end up actually also using Orange Fire by Game Color Vallejo, and this is used on the very sharpest edges, particularly on the rubber, the wax stamp seal on her front, and likewise the flowing cummerbund, and the sharpest finish points on any of the collars, which are originally done in Mephiston Red. So using Hot Orange by Vallejo Game Color. Okay, now with that all done, it's now onto the black. So edge highlight on the black, I start with Corvus Black by Citadel. A good way to look at this, I'll try to think about it, is where the light of your ceiling light or your hobby light is naturally bouncing off her. That's where you want to apply this. So the Corvus black, as you'll see, is a very subtle finish. There's a very subtle difference between the matte black I used before, but this is all starting the layering or edging process for the black, which admittedly is actually quite hard to do. Okay, with that done, you then move on to Dark Reaper. Now, you basically want to work on the idea that if you say, let's pretend, covered a centimetre of a miniature with the Corvus black, you're then covering, say, 8mm of the miniature with your Dark Reaper. Of course, I'm not doing that much on the miniature, but think of that perspective as you're applying it. And the very final piece of doing the black is using Eshin Grey by Citadel. So, as per my example before, 10 centimeters is done with Corvus black, 8 centimeters is done with your Dark Reaper, and your final 6 centimeters or millimeters, whatever it was called before, is used by Eshin black. So basically, this is the really sharpest edges of the miniature. Is using Eshin black to give off that final nice finish on the black of the miniature. Right, there she is, all finished, and hopefully you agree looking pretty sharp now. You can definitely see the investment of time into the Mephiston red edge highlighting, likewise the Gal Vorbok red. It's definitely worth it as it makes it really pop and quite special. Of course, edge highlighting the black is crucial to give it that really sort of smart looking finish, and likewise on the gold elements with both the Sigmarite dry brush and then the polished gold for some really sharp edge highlighting. So yeah, hopefully it was a fun tutorial for you to watch along and get a bit of a glimpse into this unfortunately discontinued resin miniature. But likewise, you could probably apply this to other Commissar miniatures as they are releasing more. But yep, any questions, put them in the comments, any feedback as well. But if you enjoyed this, want to support me, you can do is have a like, comment, or by subscribing, watching any of my other YouTube videos, or joining my Patreon platoon. A massive thanks to my current supporters. Let's get your bayonet sharp, let's go unoiled. Faith in the Emperor strong. Patreon platoon, sound off. Tank Commander Glenn. Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten. Tank Commander Mitchell. Colour Sergeant DuPont. Sergeants Adal, the Colonel Merrill, Veteran Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Guardsman Beard, Coquelin, Flint, Hills, Malik, Nitton, Nguyen, Smith, Tom, Tompkin, Conscript England, Gilliam, Goodwin.